I have been genuinely surprised by the outcry about 49 Afrikaners being granted refugee status to the USA. As we all know by now, in the last couple of days, a plane took off with these 49 Afrikaners who have been granted refugee status by Donald Trump, who in his own fashion said that these people have to be protected because in South Africa horrible things are happening to them, and there's a genocide against white Afrikaners, and he has broken all of his own internal rules while he's getting rid of everybody else to grant refugee status to these Afrikaners. Now, my interest in this isn't about that, and this isn't to make some kind of call as to whether they do deserve refugee status or not. Who cares, to be perfectly frank? But the point is this: why has the response in South Africa been as strident as it was? And I think I may have a bit of an answer for you here. Now, understand that since the birth of the new South Africa in 1994, we've had over 1 million South Africans immigrate or choose to live outside of the country. 1 million. Nobody said a word. Now 49 Afrikaners get refugee status, and suddenly every politician, the ANC, the mainstream media, everybody is beside themselves. So let's start understanding why it's elicited this kind of response. What is it that has made people so mad about the fact that these Afrikaner refugees have left? Well, let me give you my own take on this. By accident of birth, I happened to be born in South Africa in the height of apartheid as a white South African. During apartheid, knew nothing else, media was tightly controlled, and to be perfectly honest, we didn't see a big problem in the system because we had nothing to gauge it by. South Africa was quite an isolated country. The media was completely controlled by the government. We didn't think it was a big deal. And that's why it perpetuated so long. While the government controlled the narrative, while the government held the microphone, they could tell us anything they liked. And it was very, very difficult to understand anything different. Until incidents like the 1976 Soweto riots and subsequent riots came along, and suddenly you got the sense that maybe there's something wrong with the system. But the real wake-up call came in the 80s, when suddenly the government couldn't keep a lid on it. And international people were coming into South Africa and talking about the system of apartheid. Suddenly you started to question whether we were still the good guys that we thought we were. And if anybody needed confirmation or not, there was a movie, very, very popular movie called Lethal Weapon. And it was so popular that they made a sequel called Lethal Weapon 2. It's quite creative of them. But the interesting thing about Lethal Weapon 2 was that the bad guy was a South African. And suddenly, to my young self, I realized quite categorically that we were the bad guys. And that realization dawned on most white South Africans. That terrible feeling that you're the skunk of the world. Everything that you thought was right was wrong. It's a terrible feeling. A similar feeling has happened at times of war. Famously, the Germans fought to the end because they thought they were doing the right thing. The Americans in Vietnam, they thought they were liberating poor South Vietnamese and protecting them from communism and giving them a capitalist system, until they saw videos of their own soldiers killing children, burning down houses. Suddenly it dawned on those soldiers, wait a minute, maybe we're the bad guys. And then it dawned on their families. They said, why am I sending my children to go fight in a war? where we are perhaps the bad guys and not wanted in that country. We saw it in Afghanistan with Russia. We saw it in Afghanistan with the USA. Where people start asking that question, hey, maybe we're the bad guys. Now that's in times of war, but I don't think it's limited to wars. Which brings us back to our 49 Afrikaners getting refugee status in America. You see, I think it's got the kind of outrage that it's got. Because for the first time in South Africa, in the new South Africa, people are starting to ask, perhaps there's something wrong with our system in South Africa. What do I mean by that? Well, we came into the new South Africa with massive economic disparity. There was a need to transform our economy, which had, up until the mid-80s, been totally dominated by the white population, the minority population. And as the new South Africa was dawning, so companies were employing more and more people that were more representative of those companies' clients. It doesn't make sense if you run a bank and most of your clients are black because this branch is in some village area, to have white tellers. Doesn't make sense. Makes business sense to get people that can communicate with your clients, that are representative of your clients. This kind of thing, one would say, is a normal business practice. It happens everywhere. You see it in America, in certain states, where they'll have Spanish people serving because many of their clients are Spanish. This isn't some kind of trick. It's just business 101. You want to give your clients what they're most comfortable with. So in South Africa, we started what became known as black economic empowerment a long time before it became law. There were programs way earlier on to include blacks in the economy, and quite rightly so. Into the new South Africa, there's hints of this in the Constitution, that we need to correct the rights of the past, the wrongs of the past. That's fine. But then the government decided to make this law. And that was a big step. It's a big step. The reason it's a big step is that South Africa is a very delicate country. It's a country that comes out of a past of grinding racial discrimination. Now we've decided to rectify that problem with other racial discrimination. But we were the land of Nelson Mandela, so nobody is going to say this is wrong. He was able to sell it. We did it with a smile on our face because the laws were right. The transformation was real, and the economy was growing. We had run out of white people. Therefore, it made sense to do transformation. But then the ANC government got very aggressive about it. And almost no change was enough for this government. And transformation didn't mean increasing the pie for everybody. It became about giving stuff to their deployed cadres. BEE became the watchword for corruption. But still, the ANC pressed on, created more and more laws that started to look quite vindictive against the minority. But no, South Africa still needs these changes, and it was sold. And many people didn't tell the government it was a problem. They just invested elsewhere. And just as these laws started to really gain momentum, our economy tanked. Because we could see under the Jacob Zuma era that BEE was just really the tool to steal money. What started out as a well-intentioned, necessary part of what needed to happen in South Africa had become this dirty little curtain to hide behind while you did deals. It is estimated The Institute of Race Relations has calculated that South Africa spends nearly 100 billion rand on BEE premium in the government sector alone. What that means is that we are paying 100 billion rand more for stuff because we have to comply with BEE laws. That's not even understanding the cost of that compliance in the first place. Those companies have to employ people that have to fill out documents all day and all night. That's not counting the BEE premiums that happens in the private sector. Suddenly, what was meant to be law that was meant to help grow the economy, bring poor people into the economy, has just started to look like a pretense for theft and completely arbitrary. That brings us back to our 49 refugees. I think the reason that it's called out, that it's created the kind of feedback that it's created, is because for the first time, I think our government and many South Africa watchers have realized we've been called out on this. We are the bad guys. This is a country that discriminates against people, doesn't spread the wealth amongst the poor. We've got 50% unemployment. What are these laws there for? These laws are just there to enrich people that are close to government. This is almost legalized theft, discrimination by the state against a minority. That sits very uncomfortably. If the roles were reversed, it would look particularly ugly. So I think what we're seeing at the moment is a huge prick of the conscience of the government. As they say, oh hell, this is coming to an end. People are finally calling us on this bullshit. Similarly to what happened in the 80s, when suddenly apartheid had real world consequences. In those days it started off with some sporting isolation, but it led to far bigger things. In this case it started off with a few refugees. Who knows where it's going to lead to? My biggest concern is that this is going to lead to further economic decline. Because those companies that would want to invest in South Africa are not going to invest in South Africa, and they're not going to tell you why. They've seen property rights go. They're being told who they've got to employ and who they can't employ. They've got quotas to hit, numbers with massive fines if they don't complete the government's tick box to that government's officials' liking. South Africa better understand we live in an interconnected world. And you've got to toe a very fine line here. And if you're going to do discrimination, just be very, very careful. Because for a long time, people will turn the other cheek until they stop turning the other cheek. And I got a feeling that we are going to get a lot more of this kind of reaction from the rest of the world. Now, we've got one of two options as a country. We can join rogue nations that get isolated, you know, North Korea, Belarus, Russia, those kind of countries. We can join them, but we will not be in the family of nations, and we will not do any trade. You know, Afghanistan discriminates against women. That's fine. Would you open up a company in Afghanistan? Probably not. South Africa is playing a very, very dangerous game, and they're playing it with our futures. And I'm not trying to protect anything that I've got. I don't own a farm. I don't own a factory. I'm at the end of my game anyway. But looking forward, who would want their children to grow up in an economy that's going to be ever declining until we reverse this kind of madness? Now, not everybody likes President Donald Trump, and I certainly have my issues, but he's been the one person who has called this out. I would say that South Africa should pay heed. I think that we should look very closely at our legislation, especially some of the legislation that's passed recently. Looks very, very much like revenge and not legislation that's done in the best interests of South Africa. That's my view. Tell me what you think in the comments below. But let's thank Pace Car Rental for keeping us on air, the State of the Nation, and I want to thank you for watching this. And please subscribe to the channel and we'll give you more insights like this. Thank you very much for joining us.